You crack open a bone using a rock. Not because you plan to, not because someone taught you, not because you're smart, but because you haven't eaten in 4 days, and the marrow inside that femur might be the only reason you see a fifth. Welcome to 4. 7 million years ago. You are not a hunter. You are barely a person. And this moment, this specific moment of desperation on a dry African plain, with flies on your face and nothing resembling hope in any direction, is the moment that set in motion everything that you would eventually become. If you made it this far, smash that like button and subscribe. We're about to go somewhere your biology textbook never took you. Here's the part that nobody talks about. Your brain runs on fat, not glucose, not vegetables, fat. Specifically, the kind of dense, calorie-rich, bioavailable fat that only exists in one place on the African savanna circa 7 million years ago, inside the bones of dead animals that something else killed, which means the engine that would eventually compose symphonies, build spacecraft, and argue about things on the internet was first powered by scraps, by marrow sucked from femurs, by brains scooped from skulls, by raw, rotting, sun-cooked flesh that you grabbed while the actual predator was still close enough to hear. And here's the open loop that's going to bother you for the next 14 minutes. The real reason your ancestors ate raw flesh wasn't starvation. It was something stranger, more specific, and more disturbing than that. But we'll get there. Right now you are Australopithecus afarensis, which is a nice way of saying you are 4.5 feet tall, weigh about 64 pounds, and have the upper body strength of a modern chimpanzee paired with the lower body of something that hasn't quite figured out running yet. Your brain is about 450 cubic centimeters. For context, a modern human's brain is roughly 1/400 cubic centimeters, which means the organ you are currently using to process this information is about 3 times larger than the one making decisions right now on the East African savanna. The sun came up 2 hours ago and you haven't moved from the tree you slept in. This is not laziness, this is math. Moving costs energy, energy costs calories, calories cost meat, and meat costs something you are not yet equipped to pay. Below you the grass is yellow and flat for about 6 kilometers in every direction. There's a waterhole 800 meters east. You can see it. You can also see the 3 lions near it, which is why you're still in the tree. Your group of 11, 4 adults, 3 juveniles, 4 infants, has been in this tree since yesterday afternoon. One of the infants hasn't made a sound since midnight. You're not going to think about that right now. What you're going to think about is the zebra carcass 400 meters northwest. The lions ate from it last night. The hyenas took over at dawn. The vultures are there now, which means the hyenas are mostly done, which means the carcass is entering what your body, through nothing resembling rational thought, recognizes as the window. The brief, dangerous, critical window when the big predators have taken the protein and the birds are working the remaining flesh, but before bacteria, heat, and decay have fully converted what's left into something that will kill you faster than the lions. You have maybe 2 hours, but that is a concern for later because right now the problem is getting from this tree to that carcass without becoming something else's window. The rule, if you had the language to articulate it, would be simple. Never cross open ground alone, never approach a carcass with active predators, and never make noise near the waterhole. And what did you do? You waited until one other adult, the one with the notched ear, made the first move, and then you followed because being alone on the savanna is statistically more dangerous than being near a carcass. You reached the zebra in under 4 minutes, which is fast enough that your heart doesn't have time to talk you out of it. What hits you first is the smell, not in a way that repels you, in a way that your brainstem, the ancient chemical pre-language part of your brain, recognizes as food. This is important. You do not experience disgust at the smell of raw meat the way a modern human would. Disgust, the kind that makes a 21st century person gag at raw organ meat, is a learned cultural reflex built over thousands of years of food safety norms. You don't have those yet. You have something older, hunger receptors in your gut lining that respond to the smell of fatty acids the way a smoke alarm responds to smoke. Direct, immediate, unambiguous. Notched ear grabs a section of abdominal flesh and pulls. You go for the rib cage because you've done this before, twice, and you know that the liver and kidneys, when they're still intact, sit protected under the ribs, and the vultures haven't reached them yet. You're not thinking any of this consciously. Your hands know where to go before your brain catches up. You eat raw liver for the first time in 3 weeks. It is warm from the sun, and it tastes like iron and salt and something you don't have a word for. It takes you 4 minutes to consume roughly 600 calories. 4 minutes. That's the caloric equivalent of a large modern meal, obtained in 4 minutes by a creature with a brain the size of a medium-sized orange, at significant personal risk, with 0 tools, 0 fire, and 0 plan. The real reason begins here, and it is not what you think. Before we get to what's actually happening inside that liver when you eat it, smash the like button if you're enjoying this and subscribe. We've got more of these coming, and you do not want to miss where this story goes. Here's the biology that the fire-changed-everything narrative skips over. Raw organ meat from large African ungulates is, calorie for calorie and nutrient for nutrient, one of the most bioavailable foods that has ever existed on this planet. The liver you just ate contains more usable vitamin A than almost any plant food available to you. It contains iron in a heme form your gut absorbs at roughly 25 to 35% efficiency, versus the 2 to 8% your body would get from plant iron. It contains B12, which does not exist in meaningful quantities in any plant on the African savanna, and it contains preformed DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, the specific long-chain omega-3 fatty acid that your growing brain requires to expand beyond its current 450 cc and eventually become the 400 cc machine that will, in approximately 5 million years, invent calculus and argue about it on the internet. This is the real reason your ancestors ate raw flesh, not because they were hungry, though they were, not because they were desperate, though they were that too, but because the specific nutrients in raw animal flesh, particularly organ meat and bone marrow, are the literal biological substrate of human intelligence. The brain you are using right now was built from those nutrients across millions of generations. Every expansion of hominid brain capacity in the fossil record correlates with increased evidence of meat consumption. The older one tools at 6 million years, same story. The shift to Homo habilis, same story. The leap to Homo erectus, same story. Bigger brain, more meat. Fire didn't start this. Fire came almost 2 million years later. What started this was a 4-foot-tall primate eating warm raw liver on a dead zebra on the East African savanna because the alternative was dying small-brained and forgotten in a tree. The problem, and there is always a problem, is that getting to the carcass is the easy part. The hard part is the 12 animals between you and the tree line, who also know about the carcass and are considerably less willing to wait for the vultures to finish. The spotted hyena that comes in from the northwest is not alone. It rarely is. You know this because Notched Ear has already stood up, and the sound they're making, low, rhythmic, nothing like the vocalizations your group uses when there's a threat you can run from, is the sound that means leave now or do not leave at all. You have eaten maybe 900 calories in the last 4 days. You weigh 64 pounds. The hyena approaching weighs 130 and has a bite force of roughly 100 pounds per square inch, which is strong enough to crush the femur you cracked open 2 days ago without effort. The rule is simple. You do not fight hyenas. You do not stand your ground near hyenas. You move toward the nearest vertical surface as fast as your semi-bipedal gait allows. And what do? You grab one more piece of meat, a strip of something from the hindquarter, maybe 200 grams clutched in your left fist. As you move, because 200 grams of raw meat is 3 days of survival insurance, and your hands made that calculation before your brain finished processing the threat. You reach the tree. The hyenas take the carcass. You sit in the branches, eating the strip of raw muscle with your back against the trunk, 6 meters up, watching them, and for the first time in 4 days, the knot in your gut, that specific, physical, cellular panic that comes from approaching the caloric threshold, where your body begins cannibalizing itself, begins to loosen. You will be okay, probably, for now. Here's what happens to your body over the next 48 hours, and this is where the story gets weird. The raw meat you ate, roughly 100 calories across the 2 sessions at the carcass, begins breaking down in a digestive system that is, at this point in hominid evolution, still longer than a modern human's. You are in the transition zone. Australopithecus afarensis still has a gut length that suggests significant plant consumption. The shortening of the gut, which corresponds to the expansion of the brain because both systems are metabolically expensive and evolution is ruthless about trade-offs, hasn't fully happened yet. Which means digesting raw meat takes longer, is less efficient, and produces more waste heat than it will for your descendants. What this means practically: you are mildly nauseated for about 6 hours. Not sick, not dying. Mildly nauseated in the way that your body is running processes that are still calibrating for this new input. The bacteria in your gut, and this is the part that should genuinely disturb you, are not fully optimized for raw animal protein. Your microbiome right now in 7 million years ago is somewhere between an ape's gut and a meat-eater's gut. And it is running this new diet as something between an experiment and an emergency. You survive. Your gut adapts slightly. Not enough to notice, but enough to matter over the next generation, and the generation after that, and the 100,000 generations after that. The real cost of eating raw flesh in this period wasn't the predator risk. It wasn't the social cost of being a scavenger in a world that will eventually have enough language to have opinions about such things. The real cost was this adaptation lag, the slow generational grind of a digestive system rewriting itself to handle a diet it wasn't designed for, while simultaneously an energy-hungry brain tried to grow on the margins of what that imperfect digestion could deliver. You were running a biological software update on hardware that wasn't designed to run it, and you were doing it in real time, on a savanna, surrounded by things that wanted to eat you. 3 months pass. You've been to the waterhole 14 times. You've lost one member of your group, the infant that stopped making noise, and gained none. The dry season is still months from ending, and the zebra herds have moved east, which means the lion kills are less frequent, which means the carcass windows are getting smaller and rarer. But something has changed. You're not sure what it is, because you don't have the neural architecture to identify it as a thing yet. What's changed is that 2 members of your group, the young male with the damaged left hand and the female with the infant she carries everywhere, have started doing something different at kill sites. They're not just eating, they're cracking bones, deliberately, with rocks. This sounds obvious from the outside, it is not obvious from the inside. The conceptual gap between rock hits bone as a physical observation, and I should use rock to hit bone as an intentional act, is not a small gap. It is one of the most significant gaps in the history of intelligence on this planet, and you are watching it close in real time in 2 individuals who will probably not survive long enough for anyone to notice what they discovered. But the marrow they're getting? The dense, white, fatty marrow from the long bones that the hyenas crushed but didn't fully empty? That marrow is roughly 85% fat by caloric weight. It is the single most calorie-dense food available to a hominid on the East African savanna. And it requires no hunting, no planning, and no tools more sophisticated than a rock and a surface. The rule was simple. You don't use tools because you're smart. You use tools because you're starving enough to try things that work. And what did you do? Without realizing it, you started the longest chain reaction in the history of life on Earth. Let's talk about what raw meat actually did to your lineage's biology over the next million years, because this is where the fire changed everything story falls apart completely. The fossil record shows brain expansion in hominids beginning approximately 5 million years ago, correlating with the first evidence of systematic stone tool use and intentional animal butchery. This is 500,000 years before the earliest credible evidence of controlled fire use. The brain was already growing on raw meat, marrow, and organ tissue before your descendants had the ability to cook anything. The DHA from raw brain and marrow tissue is the specific molecule required for synapse density and neural complexity. Without it, the brain cannot physically expand beyond a certain baseline. Your modern brain has roughly 86 billion neurons. Each one is wrapped in a myelin sheath made largely of fat. That fat has to come from somewhere. Before agriculture, before domestication, before fire was reliably controlled. It came from raw animal tissue consumed at carcass sites on the African savanna. The modern human brain is the most metabolically expensive organ in the known animal kingdom. It consumes roughly 20% of your total caloric intake, while representing only 2% of your body mass. Running it is like keeping a sports car engine idling at all times. The fuel source that made it possible to build that engine, the caloric and nutrient substrate that allowed it to grow from 450 seek to 400 C over 4 million years, was raw flesh. Messy, dangerous, smelly, undignified, fly-covered, sun-baked raw flesh from the bones of animals that something else killed. You didn't become intelligent because you were smart. You became smart because you were hungry enough to eat things no other primate was eating, in places no other primate was willing to go, at risks no other primate was willing to take. Which sounds impressive until you realize that the entire foundation of human civilization was built on the nutritional equivalent of dumpster diving. The dry season ends the way it always ends, not with a specific moment, not with a storm or a sunrise, you remember, but with a gradual softening of everything. The grass goes from yellow to green at the edges, the water hole gets louder, the herds return from the east. Your group of 11 is now a group of 9. The math on this is not good, but the 9 who remain are, in ways that cannot be measured in 7 million years ago, but will be measurable eventually, slightly different from the 11 who started. The 2 juveniles who survived the dry season on a diet that was, by the standards of your species at this point, unusually high in animal fat and organ protein, have gut microbiomes that are measurably, in a way that will matter to their children, better adapted to processing raw meat. This is how evolution works when it's happening to you, not as a grand narrative, not as progress toward anything in particular, but as a slow statistical filter. The individuals whose gut bacteria handled raw meat efficiently didn't feel special. They felt slightly less sick, slightly less fatigued, slightly less likely to die during dry season. That's all. That's the margin. That's the entire engine of human cognitive evolution, a slightly smaller chance of dying in the lean months, compounded over 4 million years. You are part of that filter now, not because you chose to be, not because you're remarkable, not because something in the cosmos designated your lineage as the one that would eventually build cities, but because you were hungry, and there was marrow in those bones, and you had a rock. By the time your great-great-grandchildren, measured not in generations but in hundreds of thousands of years, begin using fire reliably, the dietary shift will already be complete. Their guts will be shorter than yours. Their brains will be measurably larger. Their toolkits will be more complex. They will cook meat because it makes it taste better, and because it reduces pathogen load, and because it dramatically increases the caloric return per pound. But they will not cook meat because they are evolutionarily required to. They will cook it because they can. Because something in your lineage, starting in moments exactly like this one, a hungry primate at a carcass with a rock in its hand, and an immune system running at 140%, built the biological foundation that made optional improvement possible. The modern human relationship with fire and cooked food is the sequel. You are living the first chapter, and the first chapter is ugly and cold, and smells like decay and has flies on it, and involves cracking bones in the dirt while something larger than you watches from 30 meters away. This is where you came from. This is the actual reason. Not fire, not agriculture, not civilization. A dry season carcass on a yellow plain and a gut that was willing to try something new. If this video made you see something differently about where you came from, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into the actual, uncomfortable, flies-included truth of human prehistory. And drop a comment below. What aspect of early human survival do you want us to cover next? The first evidence of murder? The population bottleneck that almost ended your entire species? The moment one of your ancestors looked at fire and decided to pick it up instead of run from it? We'll be here. Same place, same flies, just like you were, 7 million years ago, cracking bones in the dirt and accidentally inventing the future.